Oh yeah. Hello everyone, I'm Father Aaron. Welcome to The Dungeon Minister! When we left our adventurers, they had just completed an escort mission to Kilmarnock, helping to transport some barrels of honey ale down to a tavern there. While they were in town, they discovered a mystery. The Thieves' Guild was suspected because people were being attacked, robbed, beaten, sometimes murdered at night. They, however, discovered it was lizard men to blame. Do not even. Returning to Honeywood, they did so with greater experience. Now, the two elves are still second level. The halfling was now, however, third level, and the thief at fourth level. Thieves level up so quick, it must be really easy to learn how to steal things. That's not career advice, kids. Returning to Honeywood, laden with treasure, they're taking it to the inn where they have been staying since they arrived in town. And Parson Supple happens along and says, Oh, you're still living at the inn, aren't you? You know, you could come and live at the church. We used to have a small community of monks, and we still have all their cells available. If you wanted to stay there, we even have a strong room you could put your treasure in, and we could lock it up nice and tight. If you wanted to make a donation to the church, that would be lovely, but not required, of course, if you wanted to stay. They talk it over and decide that's a good idea. It also helps me, because it means that I don't have to remember at the beginning of every session to tell them to deduct a few gold pieces for their stay at the inn. Anyhow, they begin moving house, and they're transporting all their stuff over to the church when a messenger arrives. Rupert the druid wants to see you immediately. Rupert wants to see us. He doesn't even remember our names half the time. What does he want to see us about? But okay. They go to visit him. They find him at his cottage, which is down the end of a little lane. A rustic little cottage, all messy inside, things here and there, higgledy-piggledy. But he greets them. Come in. Oh, good, come in. Okay, he's very excited. Would you like some tea? I could make you some tea. And he puts the kettle on to boil. He forgets that it's on the hob, and it eventually boils away and the pot cracks. But anyway. I have had wonderful news. I've had news from my friends, the birds. They say they have found a patch of flowers. Good, flowers. That's really good. I mean, it's September, so... not a lot of flowers around, but... No, you don't understand. No. Special flowers. Giant flowers. Giant flowers. Remember, in the lore of Honeywood, there used to be giant flowers. We're talking a couple 100 years ago. Giant flowers that grew in the fields around the town, from which it got its name, because where there are giant flowers, there are giant bees, and the townspeople had tamed those bees and had a massive honey industry up here. Of course, giant bees, more honey, right? So that's where the town got its name. That's part of its heritage. But an ice age 200 years ago and warfare in the land destroyed the flower fields. Rupert wants to bring them back. I have had wonderful news from a blue jay who has flown far and returned and told me that he'd seen flowers. But I'm afraid for these flowers. The weather is getting very cold very early. Don't you find it very cold for September? And it is much colder than it usually would be in September. Well, I fear that we are on the edge of another of these dreadful ice ages, and if one happens, that field of flowers will die. But if we could collect seeds from those flowers... Yes. If we could collect seeds from the flowers, then my brother and sister druids and I could go south and plant them, and nurture and tend them, and guard them. And when eventually this terrible cold passes, we could bring them back as seeds and plant them here, and re-establish the flower fields of Honeywood. Would you be able to help me? They say, yes, we'll help you go and collect these. Well, it's not really helping me collect them, it's you going and collecting them for me. Well, why can't you go? Well, for one thing,
I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm rather up there in years, and I'm getting aged, and it is difficult to travel. For another thing, the flower field is located in the elven kingdom. Well, I had a little misunderstanding with the elves a few years ago, and I don't know that they would welcome me.
And then he looks at them and says, "But you two are elves," as if they didn't know it.
And you could go and get the seeds for me.
All right, they agree to do it. Rupert tells them that this flower patch was spotted to the east of Halder's Rock, just a little ways in from the coast of the Great Northern Sea. Now, the elves know where Halder's Rock is. They've never been there, but they know about it. Halder's Rock, it's actually based on a rock in my hometown. In my hometown, the river went through, and there was this huge rock that sort of stuck out into it, and there was a lagoon kind of wrapped around to this side, and the river flowed past on that side. At any rate, that's what it's based on. In my imagination, this is much bigger, though. It's a white rock, very broad, and it sticks out like the prow of a ship out into the Great Northern Sea. And Haldir, yes, I stole the name from Tolkien. I'm going to steal a lot from Tolkien in this episode, you'll see. At any rate, Haldir was a great hero of the elves. He lived some 1,500 years ago, and he was a guardian of the elven and human realms against the north. He worked with the humans to establish a sort of guard against the north. And so Haldir, this great hero, he had this rock has been named for him. Again, the elves, Bob, Johnny, and Fleetwood, have never been there, but they have heard of it. The first day's journey is very easy. They travel, it's through the grasslands, the farmlands and grasslands around Honeywood, and they enter the elven realm. Shortly after entering the forest, guards come out of the woods. They just sort of melt out of the forest and confront them. They do recognize two of their woodland kin, although they don't know them personally. They're intrigued by the halfling. They've never met a halfling before, although they have, of course, heard of them, and they don't trust the thief entirely. But as long as there's elves present, they are of course welcome through the elven land. Be careful, though, they warn. If you are traveling to the north, be careful. We do not have control over the northern border anymore. Their first day's travel is quite easy. They are on the main east-west road through the elven kingdom. They see a couple of other elves here and there, and they eventually come to an intersection of a road that goes north-south. Now, to the south and the east is where most of the elves live, and so they're starting to see a few elven homes, worked into the trees, built in the branches above or underneath the trees. But they're heading north, which is less traveled. They go a little further north and then they camp. They are so secure that, in fact, they don't set a watch. They're in elven territory still. This is still very civilized. But during the night, a giant shrew does come to check them out. Fortunately, Bob Johnny has his ring of animal control and simply tells the shrew to go elsewhere. The following day, they continue their northward journey. They go for most of the day. It is late in the afternoon when the land begins to rise and fall, little hills and coombs, and they begin to hear the sound of waves crashing. It is at sunset when they finally emerge from the forest on the shores of the Great Northern Sea. In the dimming light, to their east, they can just make out, in the far distance, the large white shape of Halder's Rock thrusting out into the sea. The path that leads that direction is rocky and uncertain, so they decide it would be better to traverse during the day, and they make camp where they are. Now, having been warned that the north is not entirely under control, they do set a watch, and it is during Bob Johnny's watch that something happens. A crashing in the underbrush. Something big is coming. Before he can even wake up his companions, out from the forest crashes a herd of deer, and they come stampeding around the camp. They have enough sense to dodge around the forms of the people now moving on the ground, but they go crashing through. And then a terrible roar comes from the woods, a howling, roaring sound, and something huge is crashing through the underbrush. I have decided that no matter what they do, if they run to battle it, if they sit quiet, no matter what, they're not going to encounter this creature this evening. I just wanted to lay down that something's out there. This comes back later. Anyhow, they finally figure, okay, it's gone, it's not coming back. They return to sleep. The next day, though, they do investigate, and they can see the underbrush torn away. And they can see clearly where, well, this is deer coming through. But here's a footprint. It's a big footprint. Big footprint. They continue their journey to Halder's Rock, and they arrive there at 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning to discover two interesting things. One, the remains of a fire at the center of the rock. Right on the rock as it thrusts out into the sea, there is the remains of a large fire and bones scattered around as if a feast was held here, and whoever was eating just threw the waste away, which is precisely what happened. They also discover in the stone itself large holes that had been carved. They look very, very old. They filled in with plant matter, but they can see where they were carved as if some structure stood here and it was anchored into the stone, as indeed also is exactly what had happened. 1,500 years ago, but it had happened. Anyway, they spend a little time here because Halder, being a great hero of the elves kind of want to look around. So they investigate the place and they find these holes of the old structure and they think, this must have been Halder's watchtower. This must have been where he kept watch. They continue their journey to the east, remembering that the flowers are east of Halder's Rock. As they go, they come to a stream where it leaves the forest and empties into the Great Northern Sea. At that point, there's a little bit of a cove. It's not terribly wide. It's quite small, bigger than they could jump across or anything like that, but a little cove. The opposite bank is covered in thick thorns. It looks very difficult to navigate, so they're wondering how they're going to continue east until they see that further toward where the stream comes in, there is a break in the trees, and it looks like there may be a path in that direction. So they're going to make their way now around the cove to get to that. As they journey, out leap robber flies. Big robber flies. Zoom, flying in and attacking them. 7 of them swarming through the air, dive-bombing them and attacking. The fight is on. The first thing Bob Johnny thinks of is that ring. He's going to command one of the robber flies just to leave, right? Okay, but you're going to have to keep concentrating until the robber fly is gone quite a ways, because once you stop concentrating, he'll be free to do whatever he wants and he'll probably come back. Fine. That takes Bob Johnny out of the fight, and he starts to wonder if that was the best idea. The other 3 are fighting against the robber flies, and it's a serious battle. Foefire gets pretty injured, but they do succeed. They defeat them. They kill them all. Now, Touchberry had noticed that while some of them came out of the branches, etc., most of them, 4 or 5 of them actually, came out of one area. So he goes nosing around over there, and he finds their nest. Eggs laid there and covered with a chalky substance to protect them. The robber flies sense something's going on, and they have covered over their eggs to protect them. Maybe they know the weather's changing too. At any rate, mixed in among the eggs, some embedded in the chalky substance, some just littered about, there's some coins and a couple of low-value gems, just enough to give a little treasure. Because robber flies are called robber flies for a reason, right? They come to steal your stuff. Anyway, they're gathering up gems and coins when that robber fly that Bob Johnny sent away comes back. Dive bombs in and attacks, and now they've got another one to fight. It's 4-on-1. It's not that big of a fight. They dispatch the robber fly. But Foefire is still injured at this point. And she's not at death's door or anything, but she's down to maybe 4 or 5 hit points. That's when my middle guy, playing Touchberry the Halfling, remembers, oh yeah, I've got a sword that heals wounds. And so he cures wounds on Foefire. Gets her back into a reasonable kind of range. Off they go on this path that they had seen. Now this path isn't real clear. It's a little vague around the edges, but they can generally follow it. It looks like maybe it was an animal path or something like that. As they go on, though, the woods get thicker and thicker and darker. It starts to get very close, and they can't tell where the sun is. And eventually they find they don't know which direction they're facing in anymore. They're supposed to be going east from Halder's Tower, but they could have curved around and be heading west or south or north or whatever at this point. They have no idea. It's getting darker and darker and closer and closer. And at some point they discover there's no more path. It has run out. So they attempt to backtrack, but they can't find a path. There's nothing. How are we going to get out of here? Where are we? And then they hear it. Laughter. High-pitched laughter. High, squeaky laughter. Oh, it's sprites, isn't it? Yup. Sprites come zipping and diving over their heads, laughing at them, pointing, and they begin to sing little songs about Fleetwood and Fire and Touchberry and Bob Johnny and what are you doing up here and why are you so lost? Haven't you found the flowers yet? How did they know what we're after? Anyway, the adventurers know enough not to try to fight them, not to confront them, not even to say anything snarky about them. They just say, please, can you help us? We don't know where we are. We need to know what direction we're going. Which way is north? And for some reason, that's how they choose to put it. I don't know if they've been doing compass work in Cub Scouts or what, but the sprites answer.
Well, north, that's where the Great Northern Sea is.
Yeah, we know the Great Northern Sea is to the north, but which way is the Great Northern Sea?
Well, the Great Northern Sea, that's to the north.
Yeah, we know, but which way is north?
Well, that's where the Great Northern Sea is.
And around they go, right? The sprites are being as unhelpful as they possibly can. Finally, they shout, where is north? Help us! I don't know why they got stopped. Why they didn't just ask which way to the flowers? They probably would have told them east. But anyway, finally they shout out, which way is north? And then, boom! The trees are gone. The light is gone. It is night. The stars arch over their heads. Now, at first they freak out. They're like, whoa, where are we? Did they transport us to another plane of existence or to the other side of the world? What's going on? No. They've just made it night. Why? The stars. Then they get it. Okay, they know the stars well enough. You know, people in the pre-modern context would have known the stars better than we do today, and so they were able to go, oh yeah, okay, that's north. And as soon as they point, poof, the trees are back, the light is back, but now they're pointing in the right direction. Okay, so that's north. And Fleetwood says, now we just have to find a path. And he's mid-sentence when there in front of them is a path that hadn't been there before, clear as day, broad and straight and easily seen. This is the sprites' realm, and they're in control. But okay, here's the path. They begin walking down it. They say, you know what? The sprites have been, a little mischievous, but they haven't hurt us before. We're going to trust them. And down the path they go, and rightly so, because eventually it comes to a clearing. The trees open up, and there in front of them they see a different kind of forest. Flowers. Enormous. 15-foot, 20-foot, 25-foot tall, huge flowers blowing gently in the breeze. They're astonished. We found it. Yes! And so they, well, it's great. Let's gather up the seeds. And they each have some large sacks. They pull them out. And they're going to go around gathering up as many seeds as they can. So, okay, how do we do this? We'll try to bend it over. Climb up it, and they're doing all this with the flowers. They're grabbing at the flowers and pulling at the seeds and all this stuff. When suddenly, behind Fire, she's over near the edge of the clearing, still near where the trees and the flowers meet. She's over there working on something, when right behind her sounds boom-ba-room. Now, at this point, apologies to John Rhys Davies. I'm stealing blatantly from your performance in the Two Towers. At any rate, boom-ba-room, and Fire is lifted off of the ground. Murderers and usurpers! And she's thrown through the air. And it's a very good thing that she was healed earlier, or she'd be dead, because she's thrown through the air, crashes to the ground, and tumbles. She takes 1d6 damage. That's 5 points is what I rolled up. She's in a bad way again. And there in front of them, as the other adventurers turn to see what this is, there in front of them, obviously, it's an ant. Well, tree ant, according to the BECMI expert book rules, but we all know it's an ent, right? Okay, here he is, and he thinks that they are here to destroy the flowers. And so he begins to attack, swinging his big, gnarled fists at them and kicking them and everything else. And they start fighting back, just instinctually like, oh, we have to fight this thing. And so they start a fight. And it's back and forth, and all the time, though, he's shouting, "Destroy my flowers where you are!" And they get the idea he's got the wrong end of the stick. He thinks they're there as, destroyers. And so then they stop fighting, and they start dodging and running as they shout out, "No, no, no, we're not trying to destroy the flowers. We're trying to save the flowers." What are we going to do? How do we convince him? Because he's certain that they are there to destroy. Finally, one of them shouts out, "Rupert sent us!" And he stops. Now, for a moment, they wonder, was this the trouble that Rupert had in the elven territory? Did we just get ourselves in more trouble? But then he says, "Rupert sent you! Oh, you are friends of Rupert. You can't be all bad." And they start to talk, and indeed, he apologizes, and they apologize. Big misunderstanding. And he says, "What do you want with the flowers?" And they say, "Well, we're going to gather the seeds so Rupert can plant them in the south and save them from this cold." And the ent, who, again, in a fit of uncreativity, I named Fanghorn, the ent says, "Yes, indeed. This cold is bad. The trees will survive. They are strong. But what about the little things? The moss and fern, the flowers, the plants, the squirrels and rabbits. What about the little things? You may gather seeds. I will help you." And so he proceeds to help them in gathering these seeds, right? He's grabbing flowers and bending them down so they can pluck out some of the seeds and things like that, lifting them up to the tall ones that don't bend as well. And he helps them gather up the seeds. And they begin thanking him and saying, "Well, we'd best head out now." And he says, No, you must not travel tonight. It is difficult and dangerous in the forest now. You must stay with me for the night." So they agree to do so. And he takes them to a little coombe, a little hollow area, and he provides them places to sleep, and he brings them some food, like, berries and nuts and kind of stuff. And he also gives them a healing draft because, he kind of beat up on them pretty bad. A couple of them took some serious blows, so he gives them some healing drafts and things like that. They spend the night there. The next day, he's going to set them on their way. But he says, "You do not want to go through the sprites' land again. Do not take their path. They are harmless, but they cause mischief, and they can delay you terribly. I will show you another way." And so he does. He shows them a path that leads from the area they're staying in up to the shore of the Northern Sea, almost directly north. Once they get there, he says, they can go west along the shore. Now they bring up that thorn patch, that area that looked like it was difficult to navigate, and he says, "Oh, there is a path around it. It is easier to see when traveling west than traveling east." Just before they go, however, he fixes them with a gaze, and he says, "Tell Rupert that you would look through Hrothgar's eyes." We would see through Hrothgar's eyes. "We'll tell him," they say. They make their farewells, and off they go on the path up to the Great Northern Sea. When they reach it, they indeed turn to their left and go along the shoreline. It is also here rocky and a little difficult to traverse, but they can make their way. They come to the area where the thorns begin, and indeed they see a path that cuts a little bit inland and just skirts behind the thorny patch into the woods and joins up with the path that they had been on when they met the sprites. But they go the other way, back to the little cove. It's now getting later in the day, and they skirt the cove, wary of any robber flies, but there's no more. They've taken care of that whole nest. And they get around to the other side and continue on toward Haldur's Rock. They approach it as night falls, and as it grows on the horizon and the light is getting less and less, suddenly On the rock springs up a fire. Someone's there. And as they get closer, indeed, they can begin to make out figures in the dark moving around it, just shadows against the firelight. But someone's there. And as they get closer still, now trying to sneak up, moving as quietly as they can, they perceive that the figures around the fire are goblins. Now, around the time we played this adventure, we had just finished reading The Hobbit as a bedtime story, okay? Now, you'll remember from The Hobbit, if you've read it, if you haven't, what are you doing with your life? Read The Hobbit! Anyway, you'll remember from The Hobbit, the Battle of Five Armies. Tolkien writes that the elves leap into battle, once they've made friends with the dwarves, they leap into battle against the goblins because they hate them. Their hatred burns fierce, or words to that effect. They dive into battle. My eldest remembers this, and so as soon as they figure out they're goblins, Fleetwood pulls his weapons and off he goes, charging into battle with a battle cry. And Bob Johnny, my youngest guy, he remembers, oh yeah, elves hate goblins. And so he follows, swinging his axe. Where the halfling and the thief look at each other. Well, I guess it's on, and they follow in as well. Now, there had been a goblin sentry posted near the edge of the rock, and as they approach, an arrow whistles out of the dark, and it hits Bob Johnny. Now, normally, his plate mail armor, things are bouncing off him all over the place, but this finds home. So he's injured as it starts, but then into the battle they all dive. Huge fight breaks out. They take care of the sentry and they charge onto the rock where the other goblins, having been warned, have armed themselves and are ready and come down to meet them. Huge fight erupts. There are 7 goblins against our 4 adventurers. So it's a pitched battle. Our adventurers are stronger, though. There's magic missiles happening. One of them is slept. 1 or 2 of the goblins, I think, are put to sleep. One of them has a whip. Now, that weapon is introduced in the companion book, but you can, of course, retroactively apply these things. So I gave one of them a whip, sort of in homage to the Misty Mountain goblins, who had whips as they drove the dwarves down into the caverns. Anyway, this guy entangles Touchberry around the ankles and yanks it down the halfling goes. And he spends a couple of rounds trying to get out of that, as the goblins yanking on the other end of the whip. Big fight. Most of them have clubs, spears, that kind of stuff. And the fight goes, it turns in the adventurer's favor. Finally, Touchberry uses his sword and slashes the whip, and up he jumps and attacks the guy who's now holding half of a whip, right? And battle over. Boom. After the battle, Fleetwood says we should heap up the bodies and burn them. He does not like goblins at all. Okay, so they decide to do that. In the process, as they are piling up the bodies, they discover that some of the goblins have little purses of coins. And there's also a larger sack that had been off to the side, probably the communal pot of treasure. As they're doing all this work, they notice across the northern sea on the far shore, fires. Little fires on the other side. And nobody's supposed to live over there. There's no human settlement there. There's no elves, no dwarves, no halflings, certainly. I wonder what that is. But the more immediate concern, that roar, that howl again. More distant now, but still unsettling in the night. What is it that's out there? What huge, monstrous beast is lurking in these forests? They'll find out next adventure.